One bright morning, billionaire Richard Hayes watched as a homeless woman, ragged and weary, began teaching his daughter under the shade of a tree. What he witnessed next changed everything. Stayed to the very end, because when she looked him in the eye, she said something no one expected. Kindly endeavor to like, subscribe, and comment what you learned if you found this story intriguing. This will enable it to reach others who need to see it. Richard Hayes had everything he could ever want: a sprawling mansion, luxury cars, a fleet of planes, and more money than he could spend in a lifetime. Yet there was a hollow feeling inside him, an emptiness he couldn't fill with all the riches in the world. His life was perfect on the outside, but inside it was a different story. He had a beautiful wife, a successful business, and a daughter, Emma, who was everything to him. But despite having it all, Richard felt something was missing. One sunny afternoon, Richard decided to take a rare break from his busy schedule. He walked into his garden, a peaceful place where he could hear the birds sing and feel the breeze against his skin. Emma, his only daughter, was sitting under a tree, a book in her hands. Richard smiled at the sight, but something unusual caught his attention. A woman, she looked homeless, was sitting beside Emma. Her clothes were ragged, her hair a tangled mess, and her face was weathered from years of hardship. Yet there was a calmness about her. She was teaching Emma something. Richard squinted, confused. The homeless woman was speaking softly to his daughter, who was listening intently. He could hear bits of their conversation. "This world isn't always kind," the woman said, her voice gentle but firm. "But the kindness you give others will find its way back to you." Emma nodded as she took notes in her book, her brow furrowed in thought. Richard couldn't help but walk closer, drawn by the unusual scene before him. "Who are you?" Richard asked, his voice curious but not unkind. The woman didn't flinch. She looked up at him with clear, piercing eyes that seemed to see right through him. For a moment, Richard felt a strange unease, but he shook it off. He was the one who had everything. She was just a homeless stranger. "I'm someone who believes that everyone has something to teach. Sometimes the ones who seem to have nothing know the most." Richard stood still, unsure how to respond. This was absurd. This woman who had nothing was teaching his daughter? How dare she try to impart wisdom to his child when she clearly had no life to show for it? But Emma, his daughter, looked so engrossed in the conversation. She wasn't scared or confused. She looked like she was learning something important, something more valuable than all the gold in Richard's bank account. "Emma," Richard said gently, walking up to her, "what are you doing here with her?" Emma looked up at her father, her eyes wide with excitement. "Dad, she's teaching me how to understand people better. She knows so much about life. I've learned more from her in an hour than I have in all my lessons combined." Richard looked at the homeless woman, studying her closely. She was so calm, so assured. There was a wisdom in her that Richard couldn't quite understand. He took a deep breath, feeling his own pride and arrogance start to bubble up. "You know," Richard said, trying to hide the annoyance in his voice, "I can give you money, a place to stay, help you with your life if you want. I don't understand why you're out here teaching my daughter when you clearly have your own struggles." The woman smiled softly. "I don't need your money, but I would love to teach her one more thing." Emma turned to her father with pleading eyes. "Please, Dad, let her teach me just one more thing. She's so wise. I want to understand life better." Richard hesitated, his chest tight. Was this really happening? Was he really considering letting a homeless woman teach his daughter? But something about the moment felt important. He didn't know why, but it felt like this was more than just a random encounter. "All right," Richard said, finally, after what seemed like forever. "You can teach her, but I'll be watching." The woman nodded, and Richard watched as she and Emma went back to their conversation.
It was strange how something so simple, so innocent, had captured his attention. For the next hour, Richard stayed nearby, pretending to be absorbed in his thoughts, but all the while, his eyes kept returning to the two of them. He couldn't explain it, but something was shifting inside him. This woman with her ragged clothes and tired eyes was teaching his daughter more about life than any expensive private school or tutor could. She had nothing, yet she was offering everything. Richard felt a sting of guilt, something he hadn't felt in years. He had built his empire on ambition and money, but now, in the quiet of his garden, he wondered if he had lost sight of what really mattered. As the sun began to set, the homeless woman stood up and gathered her things. Richard felt an urge to stop her, to ask her more questions, to understand her better, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. "Thank you," Emma said, smiling brightly as she stood to hug the woman. "I'll never forget what you taught me today." The woman nodded. "Take care of your heart, little one. The world needs more hearts like yours." Richard watched as the woman walked away, disappearing into the distance. He felt a strange emptiness, as though something had been left behind. He turned to his daughter, who was still smiling, her face glowing with newfound wisdom. "Dad, I think she was the most important person I've ever met," Emma said softly. Richard's heart clenched. Was this what he had been missing all along? A simple connection? A lesson in kindness? In humanity? He didn't know, but for the first time in years, he felt like something was about to change.
The next few days passed, but Richard couldn't shake the strange feeling that lingered after the homeless woman's visit. It wasn't just that she had taught his daughter something valuable. It was how she made him feel. A sense of guilt gnawed at him every time he looked at his lavish lifestyle, the riches that seemed to be all he had worked for. Was this the life he truly wanted? The life that Emma would grow into? Richard couldn't stop thinking about her words. Sometimes the ones who seem to have nothing know the most. Was it possible that he had been wrong all this time? He had spent years building an empire, but had he forgotten the very things that mattered? He knew he had to do something to make sense of the feeling inside him. He decided to go back to the park where he had first seen the woman. Maybe, just maybe, he could find her again. On the following weekend, Richard took Emma with him. She was curious, her eyes wide as she walked beside him. "Dad, do you think we'll see her again?" she asked excitedly. "I don't know, sweetie," Richard replied, feeling an unexpected mix of hope and uncertainty. "But I want to find out." As they arrived at the park, Richard scanned the area, looking for any sign of her. There were people walking dogs, kids playing, but no sign of her. He and Emma sat on the same bench under the tree where the lesson had taken place, the place where everything had started to change. Emma sat quietly, looking down at the ground. "Do you think she was real, Dad?" she asked, almost as if she were talking to herself. Richard didn't answer right away. Was the woman real, or had she been some kind of angel sent to open his eyes? He had no answers, only more questions. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the park, and Richard was about to suggest they head home when, from the corner of his eye, he saw her. There she was, sitting on the same bench, the same spot where she had been days before. Her clothes were still ragged, but her posture was strong, dignified. She looked just as calm and composed as he remembered, and once again there was that same mysterious aura about her. Richard stood up, feeling a strange sense of urgency in his chest. "Emma, stay here. I'll be right back." Emma nodded, her curiosity getting the best of her. Richard walked towards the woman, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. He was determined to know more about her, to understand why she had come into their lives and what her presence meant. As he approached her, she turned to face him, and for the first time, Richard saw a glimmer of recognition in her eyes. She smiled softly,
but there was something in her gaze that felt different this time. It was as if she knew exactly what he was thinking, what questions were running through his mind. "Hello again," Richard said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I didn't expect to find you here." She nodded. "You've been thinking a lot, haven't you?" Her words were not a question, but a statement, as though she knew him better than anyone ever could. Richard was taken aback by how easily she could read him. Yes, I've been thinking about what you said to Emma, about what you taught her, and I don't understand. How is it that you, someone who has nothing, know so much about life?" The woman chuckled softly. "I may not have riches, but I have lived. I've seen how people struggle, how they fight for survival, and I've learned that it's not the things we own that define us. It's the love we give, the kindness we share, and the way we treat others. Those are the things that matter." Richard's heart felt heavy as her words sank in. He had spent so much of his life chasing after wealth, believing that if he could just have more, he would be fulfilled. But now, standing before this woman, he realized how wrong he had been. He felt a deep sense of shame, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. "I've been living all wrong," Richard whispered, more to himself than to her. "I've been teaching Emma the wrong lessons. I've been showing her a life of comfort, but not the kind of life that truly matters." The woman looked at him, her eyes softening. "It's never too late to change. You can start by listening to your heart, by giving more than you take, by teaching your daughter the things that truly count." Richard swallowed hard, feeling as though the weight of the world had just fallen on his shoulders. "I don't know where to start." The woman smiled kindly. "You've already taken the first step by realizing the truth. Now all you need to do is act on it. Start by being present in your daughter's life, not just as a father, but as someone who truly cares about her happiness and well-being." Richard nodded slowly, as if he were awakening from a long sleep. He realized that for all his achievements, he had never truly been present in the way he should have been. He had always been too focused on work, on expanding his empire, to notice what really mattered. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I think I understand now." The woman stood up, gathering her belongings. She looked at Richard one last time, her eyes warm with a quiet knowing. "You're welcome," she said simply. "Remember, it's not about what you have, it's about who you are." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the distance once more. Richard stood there, motionless for a long moment, the weight of her words still echoing in his mind. He walked back to Emma, who was still sitting on the bench, watching him with wide eyes. "Dad, did you learn something?" Emma asked gently. Richard smiled at her, a smile that reached all the way into his heart. "Yes, sweetie. I learned that the most important things in life can't be bought or sold. They're found in the moments we share, in the love we give, and in how we treat the people around us." Emma beamed, her eyes sparkling with joy. "I'm glad you met her, Dad." Richard smiled, feeling like he had finally found the missing piece of his life.
The days that followed were nothing short of transformative for Richard. For the first time in years, he found himself truly present with his family. His work became secondary, his wealth no longer a constant focus. Instead, he began to spend his time nurturing the connections that mattered most, his daughter, Emma, and his wife, Claire. Richard became more involved in Emma's education, not just through tutors and textbooks, but through experiences that taught her about kindness, empathy, and the value of relationships. Together, they volunteered at local shelters, helped feed the homeless, and spent time listening to people's stories. It was a side of life that Richard had long ignored, but now it felt more meaningful than anything else he had ever done. He found himself thinking about the homeless woman often. He couldn't stop wondering who she truly was. How had she come into his life? What had driven her to speak the way she did, to impart such wisdom despite the hardships she had endured? There were so many questions left unanswered, but one thing was clear. She had changed him, and she had changed his family's life for the better. One afternoon, as Richard and Emma were returning from volunteering at a community center, Richard stopped in his tracks. There, sitting on a bench in the park, was the woman again. She was quietly watching the world go by, as she always did. Emma immediately spotted her and tugged at her father's sleeve. "Dad, look, it's her!" Emma exclaimed, her voice full of excitement. Richard's heart raced. It had been weeks since he last saw her, and he hadn't expected to find her again. But there she was, as if fate had brought her back into his life. He walked towards her slowly, unsure of what to say, but knowing he needed to speak to her one more time. The woman looked up as he approached, her eyes calm and knowing, as if she had been waiting for him all along. "You found me again," she said with a soft smile. Richard stood in front of her, his hands clasped behind his back. "I've been thinking about you a lot, about everything you said, and I wanted to thank you. You've changed me. You've changed us." The woman nodded, her smile warm but subtle. "I didn't change you. You had it in you all along. You just needed to see it." Richard's chest tightened with emotion. He was overwhelmed by the simplicity of her words. He had spent years chasing after success, believing that wealth and status were what mattered most. But now he knew the truth. True success was about love, kindness, and making a difference in the lives of others. "How did you know? How did you know what I needed to hear?" Richard asked, his voice trembling with gratitude. The woman tilted her head slightly, her eyes reflecting a quiet wisdom. "I didn't know you needed to hear anything, but I've seen many people like you, chasing after things that don't matter. I've walked this earth for a long time, and I've learned that life has a way of bringing the right lessons at the right time. It's up to you whether you listen." Richard stood in silence for a moment, taking in her words. It was as though she had unlocked something inside him, a deeper understanding of life, of what it truly meant to live with purpose. And in that moment, he realized that he had never been more alive. Emma walked up to the woman and gave her a hug. "I'm so glad we met you," she said, her voice full of emotion. The woman smiled and hugged Emma back, her arms gentle but firm. "You're a bright girl, Emma. Never lose that heart of yours. Keep it open, and you'll always find your way." With that, the woman stood up, gathered her things, and began to walk away, just as she had before. Richard watched her go, a sense of peace settling in his heart. He knew this was their final meeting, but he didn't feel sadness. Instead, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had taught him everything he needed to know without ever asking for anything in return. As Richard and Emma walked back to their car, Emma looked up at her father. "Dad, do you think she was an angel?" Richard chuckled softly, though the thought had crossed his mind too. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe she was. Or maybe she was just someone who needed to remind us of what's really important in life." Emma smiled, her eyes sparkling with understanding. "I think she was both." Richard nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the right path. He had found a purpose that went beyond wealth and success. It was about helping others, about teaching Emma the values that truly mattered, and about living a life full of meaning. From that day forward, Richard lived with intention. He focused on the things that truly mattered, his family, his community, and the love they shared. The homeless woman had changed him, and in doing so, she had set him on a journey that would shape the rest of his life. And so Richard Hayes, The once ambitious billionaire found something far more valuable than all the money in the world: the richness of a heart full of compassion and the knowledge that the most important lessons are often taught by those who seem to have the least. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and comment. Values truly matter.